Let's go ahead and open up to James chapter 1. This is a third and final point that we're going to be taking a look at in James concerning facing trials with the right perspective. And I know that has been kind of a theme lately, off and on, but you know, the idea of striking when the fire's hot, or the iron's hot, excuse me. You want to strike when the fire's hot, it'll blow up on you. It's like the lady I saw today that struck when the fire was hot and it blew back in her face because she was trying to set a car on fire. So she struck at the wrong time. But when the iron's hot, or in other words, and I believe this is the way when you take a look at the epistles, the purpose for their writing was when these situations arose. And it was an opportunity then to address what they were going through. It wasn't something that they wrote ahead of time, because then they would read it and they'd say, I don't know what this applies to, because what is this you're talking about? Oh, well, when it happens, you'll go, oh, I remember. And so we do that. It's a good way for us to remind ourselves during specific times of whatever it is we're going through, and just encourage ourselves in how we are to be living during difficult times. And I think that 1 Peter is really a good way for us a good epistle for us to look into. It deals with a different type of struggle, the persecution they're facing because of their faith. But certainly within that epistle, you find some good answers to how we are to conduct ourselves as Christians. Over in James, we're looking at specifically trials. James chapter 1 and verses 2 through 4. James tells us to consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. Let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. So far we've covered the first two parts of this formula, and that's what I'm referring it to as a formula, a plan that we can put into action that will help us when we face trials to stay faithful. And the first one that we looked at already was to consider it all joy. The idea that the trial itself may not be joyful, but the outcome certainly can be, because of us allowing it to work in our lives in such a way as to be fruitful. We understand there can be a positive outcome for us, and so it certainly then is important for us to consider it that way. You can take a look in all kinds of sports where you have to put in long hours of preparation. And it is really a great discouragement, you know, and I'm a football fan, so you imagine these guys that have worked, and I'm not talking about just that season, I'm talking about they were in Pop Warner, they worked all their lives, you know, high school, college, made it to the pros, finally got there, and then they're in the pros and they finally make it to the Super Bowl. That's the goal. That's the end goal. Make it to the Super Bowl. And then they lose. You say, yeah, well, there's always next year. Yeah, Dan Marino never had a Super Bowl ring. And he was one of the greatest quarterbacks that ever played, so there's not always a next year. Sometimes you get injured. Sometimes you can't play. You get to that point, and after all the effort you put in, after all that you've endured, you're disappointed, you're saddened. But you go through all of that, and you succeed, and you get that Super Bowl ring, you look back and you say, it was worth it. It was worth it. I endured. I went through all of this. I've worked so hard to get here. And yes, I'm here and I got this ring to show it. I look back at those trials and I may have been complaining. I didn't like what I had to go through. I didn't have to workouts and the long hours. Man, but now I've achieved something. You see, what we as Christians realize is that actually is the end result of what we do. We're not going to get to the end and go, oh man, we lost. No, we don't. We don't lose. So when we face these trials, we always face them with the idea that there is going to be a lesson learned. There is going to be an endurance that becomes ours. And that was the second point view trials as a means to endurance. The reason we consider it all joy is because we know that in the process of doing this, that we're going to gain something from that. And what we need is endurance. We need the endurance to continue on in our daily lives. The endurance to face trials that will be greater than the ones we're facing now. Or just daily walking with Christ. Those type of things. And we know that as we go through these trials, if we approach them with the right perspective, then it's going to produce endurance. It's going to make us stronger. And we're going to be more capable of succeeding in this Christian walk, not shrinking back, not turning away from God, and then helping others, being there to encourage others to make that same walk. And the last part of this is the idea that through all of this, these trials, this testing, will make us complete. In other words, it will provide all that we need to succeed. And I would say this: without trials, we are not complete. Without trials, we don't have the wherewithal to succeed in this Christian walk. Now, that suggests that the Christian walk is not an easy walk. Right? And it's not. I mean, there are some trials that are easier for us to get through in life. And it doesn't take much to get through them. But when it comes to the Christian life, it is not something that's a temporary part of who we are. It is something that we are all the time. It's an everyday thing for us, an every hour and every minute of everyday thing for us. And we stay there until the day we die. You know, if you're a young man and you're in a relationship with a girl and that girl leaves you, well, you can get over that. You can work through that. And there'll be another day when you'll meet another girl. And you can move on from there. I saw this, just to share this with you, my niece put a thing on Facebook and she said, you know, when someone tells me there's how's that saying go, there's another fish in the sea or whatever that is. She goes, these are the fish that are out there. And she found the ugliest fish she could find. And she put like 12 really horribly looking fish. And she goes, this is what's out there. So don't tell me there's another fish in the sea. Look at them. I thought that was hilarious. But we can get over that. We can get over a broken heart. We can move on. And we can go into another relationship. We move from one to the next and so forth. Jobs are the same way. You get a job, you love the job, maybe the job ends, you got to move on. You go to another job, you start over. This is not something we leave. Christianity isn't something we go away and we start over. It's something we get into and we stay in until we die. And whatever comes with it, it comes all the time. So because of that, and because of the difficulties that you face as a Christian, one, battling your own sin, recognizing that there is sin, and actually putting up a fight against it, it's a lot easier just to sit back and cruise through life without even being concerned about what you're doing to someone else or what you're doing to yourself. As if there's any price to be paid for that. It's like, man, whatever. I don't believe in this stuff. I don't believe in sin. I can do whatever I want. And no big concern to me. It's another thing to be someone who looks at your life and says, I want to live a particular way that's in line with the Word of God. And I'm going to struggle with that. And I'm going to battle that. And I'm going to try to be, and I'm going to fall short of that. And then I'm going to pick myself up and I'm going to keep doing again. That's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. Right? It's a struggle. So we have that battle, our own inward battles that we face. As Paul said, he had the concern for the church. We have the battle of worrying about what's going on in the body, worldwide, and then locally. That was a concern that we face. There's a concern of persecution, the idea that you actually can be persecuted because of your faith in God. You can lose your job over it and so forth, and not get a promotion because of it, because of your faith. So those things are realities, and we deal with those on a regular basis. So that being the case, those things are not going to be absent of the Christian life. It's not going to be an onslaught. It's not going to be, in most cases, where it's just constantly ongoing. But there's the regular trials that we face. And because of that, we have to have these. We have to face them in a particular way with the right perspective so that we can gain the endurance, so that we can be complete. So that we can have what we need to take us to the end of this journey. Be it my death or the Lord returning, whichever one it is, that I need to be made complete. So, in this final pillar, or part of this formula, in verse 4, James says, "And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." View trials as a means to making you complete. Let me just interject this right here. Later on, following right after this, he's going to talk about wisdom. If anyone lacks wisdom, let him ask. Well, how do you gain wisdom? Well, wisdom comes through trials, right? It comes through going through experiences and making mistakes, making bad decisions, making good decisions, figuring what works and learning what didn't work. And as time goes on, as you go through those trials and as you get older, those experiences mean something. If we don't have the trials, we don't gain the experiences. If we don't have the trials, we don't have the opportunity to make good decisions and bad ones and learn from those. We're going to make bad decisions, and we're going to make good decisions. Right? Now, nobody here has gone through the life saying every decision I ever made was perfectly good. No. So there's something to be said about someone who's been through trials, who's been through, and you hear that with people who say, I've been through things before in my life. There's something to be said about that. Because they've gone through trials and they've gained some wisdom from that. And it doesn't have to be the exact same thing. It's just the idea of saying, I've been through tough times. And in my experience, this is what happens when you make that kind of decision. This is what happens when you do that. Or we tried this and it didn't turn out so well. You see, that's gaining wisdom. You realize that you tried something, it didn't work out so well, so we won't go down that road next time, or we won't do it this way next time, or maybe you should consider this in the decision you're going to make. That is that idea of completeness. It's the idea that you have the wherewithal to be able to, because of your experiences, as you're going through a trial, have the tools necessary to say, I'm going to make less mistakes. Not that you're going to make no mistakes, but I'm going to make less mistakes. I'm going to be better prepared to make right decisions because of the experiences I've had. And that's important. That's important because your life's going to continue on. I think about Janella. And think about when you guys had the collapse. Were you living in what? Laughlin or Kingman? Bullhead City. That's right, Bullhead City. You guys had a business, a contractor, real estate, and then, you were building a life. You'd been building a life there for a while. And I think about that, and then all of a sudden this whole collapse came in. It's like, man, what in the world? Now, we can either walk away from that and be embittered and angry, or we can say, hey, there were things that were out of my control. There were things I couldn't make decisions on. I did the best that I can, but I've learned something from it. I've learned something. I'm still here. I'm still living. I'm still faithful to God. I can still serve God. And I can look at those experiences and I can say, they have given me something I didn't have before. That's why you can consider it all joy, because they've given you something you didn't have before. Now, it may have cost you something, but what you get out of it is much greater. Because it's not something that you have to just keep to yourself. Now you can take that experience and you can go to somebody else. Whereas before you couldn't share that with them. Like, I don't know, never been through that before, I don't know what it's like. I don't have any advice for you. Or if you do give advice, it's giving advice out of a lack of knowledge, and it may not be very good advice. Well, you know what I think? It's like, well, have you ever been through this? No, but this is what I think you should do. So you have something to offer. You have something to offer your children. You have something to offer your grandchildren. You have something to offer your brethren in Christ. So those kind of experiences bring about a completeness in us so that we're able to continue to move forward. It would be easy to say, well, I've been through trials and my faith has been proven to be genuine, and now I've acquired endurance, so I'm good. Right? Those are the two first. Right? I'm good. My faith has been tested. I stayed strong, and I got some endurance, and I'm good. But The fact that that's not the end. James doesn't say it's the end. He says, let endurance, next step, have its perfect result. Us gaining endurance is supposed to take us to another place. And that is so that you may be perfect. Let it have its perfect result. Let it come to where it's meant to come. Let it take you where it's meant to take you, so that you can gain something from this. Trials produce more than just endurance. If I am an endurance runner, and I'm running simply for endurance, or is that really what, as I'm just doing it for endurance? Well, for example, when you run, are you just running so you can gain endurance? I run more every day, right? Every time I go out, I'm going to work out more. And my end goal is just to get endurance. No. And what's your end goal? Your end goal is to win the race. You don't just go out there and run. You have things you want to achieve. You have goals you set. I want to gain endurance so I can do this. I can go, a mile in this amount of time, or I can run this much further. You have goals. So it's not just to run just for endurance sake. There's something behind that. And so when we take a look at professional athletes, they don't just go out there and gain endurance for endurance sake. We don't gain endurance just so we can say, well, now I can endure. There's something behind that. There's something that endurance is supposed to be used for. Ultimately, it's to produce a victory. Take a look over in 2 Timothy. So, when I'm out here and I'm working out, it's like I started getting back into the gym. Took me 6 weeks of slow process just to begin to get my strength back. And you got to go slow. You can't rush in. You go in, I'm doing full body, I'm doing light weights, And how the guys are, I got to pick the heavy weight, look at me. I'm like, you know what, do that. I go in, I'm like, 25 pounds, 50 pounds, 2 weeks. Go up 5 pounds, 2 weeks. Go up 5 pounds. Then all of a sudden I start feeling good, right? Like, now I'm feeling good. Now I'm going to start doing sets. I'm going to do sets, 3 sets, upper body, core, legs, 3 days a week, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'm building up. And I'm doing all of that for what? To do more weight? To gain more weight? Is that what I'm trying to... I want to do it so I can just do more of that? I'm not doing it so I can do more of that. I'm doing it because I have a goal in mind. I want to go to the Miss Universe competition. For the geriatric. In a wheelchair. So, no, I have an end goal in mind. Right? I'm putting all the time and effort in and building up endurance. I'm getting stronger. Then, of course, we get a call and they say, we're closing the gym down. Thanks a lot for that. Took me 2 months to get here, and I got to start all over again. But I had an end goal in mind. What I'm going to do, I want to get stronger. I want to get more physically fit. I want to get healthy. I want to be around a little bit longer, so I want to exercise, right? Got things I want to do. Want to feel good. Well, when you take a look at this endurance that we come into because of the trials, there's a goal. In 2 Timothy chapter 4, Paul says, concerning his own life, he says, I fought the good fight. I have finished the course. I have kept the faith. I'm going to stop right there. 2 of these, the good fight and the course, are terms that are related to athleticism, athletic. The idea of working. So in order for him to do that, and we know the life of Paul, he had to endure a lot to get to this point. Why? Just so I could say I did it? No. In the future, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. So Paul says the trials that I've gone through, the fight that I fought, the course that I finished, and all that it took me to get me to this point was so that I could get this victory crown. There was victory at the end. You see, when you look at that, Paul says, now I can count it, or I can consider it all joy. Not now, but you understand why I can consider it all joy when I encounter these trials, because it brought me...
He didn't hear. Was it a trumpet?
Big finish.
If you have difficulty hearing, we'll just turn this up. Tom's like... He was reading his Bible, he said, and it slid it up. If anybody's ear is bleeding, I'm sorry about that. So, Paul understood what the result of all he went through, what it brought him to. James says that endurance produces three things. He says it makes us perfect, it makes us complete, and that we lack in nothing. The word for perfect here, the first time you use it, is the word teleos, and it's a perfection towards, now get this, turn this down just a little bit more, it's a little hot. Perfection towards a given end. There's an end in sight. I mean, you're looking for something. So it's perfection towards that. It's completion towards that. You are being provided what you need to get you to the end of whatever it is that you're aiming towards. The perfection that is born of trials makes a man fit for the work he was sent to do. Go over in Romans. You know, when you look at different things you do in life, Romans chapter 5. Not everybody faces the same type of trials in a particular job, because there are certain things that are required to prepare you for that work. For example, when I hired in as a manager of a nutrition store, I didn't go to 8 weeks basic training. They didn't take me out and hike me miles and miles and miles. They didn't train me in a weapon, right? They didn't keep me up for long hours with no sleep. I didn't go through that training to manage a nutrition store, right? Why? Because I don't need that kind of endurance to do this kind of work. But likewise, they wouldn't take the training I got as a manager and give that to someone who's going out to war. It would do them little good. So the endurance, the trials that we go through and what we develop is tied to what we're trying to accomplish. And since it is a difficult thing for us to get to the end of this faithful walk, trials are going to be difficult for us. God's not going to let us just slide by. He knows what we need. And we're going to face those things so that we can endure. In Romans chapter 5 and verse 3, Paul says, and not only this, but we also exult in our tribulations, knowing that tribulation brings about perseverance. And perseverance, proving character, and proving character, hope. And hope does not disappoint, because the love of God has been poured out within our hearts through the Holy Spirit who was given to us. Think about the trials that the first century church went through. Why were those trials so difficult for them? Well, you say, well, because the people were just so stubborn and hard-headed. Yes. But in order for the church to grow, in order for these people to endure, they faced some very, very difficult situations. And it did one or two things. They either got stronger or they walked away from it. And when you go back and you look through the book of Acts, and you look at the persecution that takes place after the stoning of Stephen, Acts chapter 7, and what happens to the church, it scatters. And the persecution doesn't stop when it scatters. Paul is out there pursuing them. But what are they doing? They're enduring. They're going out, they're spreading the gospel, they're teaching. When you go back and look at the trials that Paul went through, the difficulties when he becomes a Christian, what he faced in trying to bring about the spreading of the gospel. He faced some very difficult situations, but those difficult situations prepared him for what he was going to face down the road. In fact, go back to Acts chapter 9 with me. This is when Saul is on the road to Damascus. The Lord appears to him. He goes into Damascus. And then the Lord speaks to Ananias. And he tells Ananias to go and talk to Paul. Verse 11. And the Lord said to him, get up and go to the street called Straight and inquire at the house of Judas for a man from Tarsus named Saul, for he is praying. And he has seen in a vision a man named Ananias come in and lay his hands on him so that he might regain his sight. But Ananias answered, Lord, I have heard from many about this man, how much harm he did to your saints at Jerusalem. And here he has authority from the chief priest to bind all who call on your name. But the Lord said to him, go, for he is a chosen instrument of mine to bear my name before the Gentiles and kings and the sons of Israel. And I will show you how much he must suffer for my name's sake. Why must he suffer that much? Why must he suffer it? Because the work that God had for Paul was going to take a lot out of him. It's going to require a lot of him. And those trials that he goes through prepares him every step of the way, because he learns from those things. And he grows from those things. There was an end result. That's an idea of perfection, the teleos. Secondly, he said it's going to make us complete. That's what James says. The word complete means entire. Trials remove that which makes a man incomplete. For example, doubt. As he endures, he is complete. He becomes mature. Trials take us from immaturity to maturity. It's the idea, and I love this, and maybe you've seen this before too. You watch these war movies, right? And you see these, what do they call them, like green, the new guys that come in, right? They're these, what are they? They're like, these green recruits come in. And you see this old burly guy, right, coming out, the sergeant. He's been out here fighting for 2 years. And he comes out and all these little young soldiers are like, whoa, look at him. He's like, what are you guys doing? It's time for us to get ready. This guy could have been very close to these guys when he first got there. But over time and trial, he becomes this man. He becomes the man who is the leader because he's like, look, I know what you're going to face. And he'll be like, hey, a lot of you ain't going to make it. I'll just tell you right now. Right? So those things, and then you'll watch these movies and you'll see these guys. They go from these terrified kids that once they begin to experience the battle, right, they mature. And I'm not saying that everything is perfect and in the movies everything comes out exact. But there's no question that when you go through trials, when you've been out experiencing as a firefighter, there's a lot of difference between the man that's been a firefighter for 5 years and the guy that just comes out of training. There's a lot of difference between that. What he knows and what, how he can help and how she can help. It's not any different for us as Christians. There should be a difference between a Paul and a Timothy. A Paul who's been out there serving all these years and going through all these trials, and those trials produced something, brought him to a place of completeness where he had the things necessary to face the next trial, to face the next battle. He has come to a place of maturity in his walk. And that's what trials will do for us. They'll bring us to a place of maturity. When you think about professional sports, they always have these guys on the offense and the defense who they would call the old timers. But all the rookies look up to them. Because they know that this man knows far more than they know how to win in this game. And they listen, they pay attention. Because he's been in the battle. And he knows what to expect. He's come to a place of maturity, completeness. And then James says, we will be lacking in nothing. This is the counterpart of complete. Not only are we complete, not only have we come to a place of maturity, but we're not lacking anything that we need to continue on down this road of faith. We're not left wanting. Because trials have proved, one, that we have a genuine faith, and two, have produced the endurance that we need. And now we've come to a place of maturity. What we need is a faith that's been tested. And from that, we've removed things that would hinder us in our walk. The Hebrew writer tells us to lay aside every encumbrance that so easily entangles us. Trials will do that for us. Trials will allow us to let go of things that will trip us up in our faith. Doubts. Can I do this? One of the best ways for someone who doubts whether they can do something or not to overcome that is to do it. Do it. And if you fail on it, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you weren't prepared to do it at that time. And you can take what you learned from that and now do it again. And do it again. And do it again. Let those trials, let those experiences produce within you endurance so that you don't give up, so that you come to a place of maturity and you then say, yeah, I can do this. Oh, wow. Really? You can do this? Yeah. Well, how? Well, I've been doing it for a long time. I've been fighting this battle for a long time. And I know what to expect. And I know how to approach the trials. I have an end in mind. The salvation of my soul. And I'm not going to give up. Because that is where I'm headed. So trials are meant to produce something. They're not trials for trial's sake. Oh, you need to go through some tough times. No, even as parents, we understand that, right? When we allow our children to go through difficult times, it's not just because we're being mean and say, yeah, I want to see you suffer for a little bit. We're hoping, and we guide them into learning something from that. They may come back and say, man, I don't know why you just didn't help me. Why didn't you just bail me out? And then the parent says, well, let's sit down and talk about this for a little bit. What'd you learn from it? I learned never to ask you for help. Okay, good. But here, let me tell you what you should have learned from it besides that. And then you help guide them. Help them to understand. So that we don't just let our children go through difficult times just because we're being mean. They're going through difficulties and we let them work through things. We're there with them. We're guiding them. We don't have to be, helicoptering around them with everything they do. But when we have opportunity, say, now let's see what we've learned from this experience. So there's an end result for these trials. James says that they'll produce endurance, and that endurance takes us the rest of the way. Endurance takes us to a place of providing maturity, a place of completeness, a place where we're lacking nothing. That gets us to the end, to victory. So faithful Christian living produces that we face in, excuse me, let me back up a little bit. The life that we live as faithful Christians when we face trials produces something for us. And in the end, it's to produce this victorious crown. Now, if I know that, then I'm going to work towards that. And again, it goes back to sports. You can take a look at, and I know, my goal was never to be a Super Bowl champion or a World Series champion or a Stanley Cup champion. I just played it for the love of the game. I know that at the end of a sports figure's career, they can sit back and they can live with the fact that they never got that championship. But you cannot tell me that there isn't a little bit of disappointment there, and sometimes a whole lot of disappointment that they spent their entire life working to that end and didn't get there. There's got to be some kind of disappointment in that. And for some, greater than others, they can learn to live with it. Well, the end result of what we're trying to do is something that cannot be snatched away from us. It's something that is sure and true. It's something that Peter talks about in 1 Peter that doesn't fade away. It's there. It's reserved in heaven. And God says that victory is yours. Paul talked about that again, 2 Timothy 4, 7, 8. That is yours. But you need these trials to get there. You need these trials to get there. You tell me, what situation, maybe there is one, I can't think of one offhand, what situation you would look at and you'd say, nah, you don't need to go through any ups and downs with that. You can do it with just smooth sailing. Life, you can't get through life that way. Just everyday living requires you to go through trials. Everyday living. And when you pursue an endeavor that is far more worthwhile, that is the salvation of your soul, as compared to some job, then it seems to me that there's a need for greater endurance. Greater endurance. Because of the value of what you're pursuing. And the possibility of you losing that. And so, God provides for us what we need. We look at trials. We consider all joy when we encounter them. Because we know that those trials, the testing of our faith, will produce something. It will produce endurance. And that endurance will take us to a mature individual, so it will be lacking in nothing, so that we can get to that point that we can have that victorious crown. So when we face things like this, whatever may be in your life, look at it that way. Look at it as if it's a means to get you to the end of what you're living for.